Mich Auto created the Legislative Auto Caucus because they recognized that we had caucuses, Sportsman's Caucus, all sorts of caucuses. In fact, maybe even a cheese caucus. I haven't asked about that, but we didn't have one entity within the legislature that was solely focused on our signature industry. And I know you, Jerome, and Senator Morrow and Senator DeMoose spent some time talking about the importance of this strategic plan, including our auto industry. So we know how critical this is to our future, whether it's traditional automotive manufacturing of ICE vehicles or battery and electric powered vehicles, which are the wave of the future, so that we can not only compete with the Chinese who are invested in electric automotive, but we can beat them and continue to be the automotive capital of the world. So with that, Jerome, I'm going to kick it back to you for the last session of the afternoon and with Representative Tate and Representative VanderWall.
Oh, how are you?
Very good.
So the two of you get to back clean up, and I'm just going to ask you some questions about these things called autos. Maybe you've heard of them, maybe not. First of all, let me just ask, a lot has been going on in the last, few months with, tariffs and reaction to tariffs. Let's open it up that way and we'll go downstream. Where are things with the auto industry right now from your perspectives?
Well, I think from my perspective, the auto industry, and when you look in particular at the state of Michigan, not only do we have this heritage of auto and manufacturing that has been here for over a century and has gone through a variety of evolutions over time. But, most recently, I think we're seeing, I think some opportunities, for us to figure out how to move forward. I think, when you talk about tariffs in particular, I think that has been a drag on the auto and creating more soft demand in terms of, automobiles. But I think, what we've been seeing just in terms of innovation from the state of Michigan, and also the willingness to move into new technologies, whether you're talking about EVs or other types of technologies that go into an automobile. I think Michigan is a place that we can be primed to continue to be a leader in automotive going forward.
Well, and where do you see us right now, auto-wise?
Well, number one, Michigan is the state that put people on four wheels. And I think it's extremely important we continue to push forward to make sure that Michigan is the leader when it comes to making sure that the auto industry and the people that work in the auto industry have the best opportunity. I think as we look at what the potential impact of what tariffs could be, we have to be open to what does that really look like in the long run when we're bringing these products back in to the state of Michigan, who it's employing, bringing in young families. And I think ultimately, it doesn't matter what party you belong to, we need to make sure that Michigan grows in population. We can't do that without the auto industry, and we need to make sure that all the affiliates that go into that same situation have the opportunity to grow also. So I look forward to what our horizon looks like. I think our future in the auto business is very, very bright, and it's not going to come without some bumps, but we were experiencing bumps over the last several years with a transition away from fossil fuel and that with the autos, and we're starting to see that people have spoken, and both of them are wanted, and I think that's good for the state of Michigan.
I want to ask just one more tariff-related question, and then we'll move off to some other things, innovation and other things like that. Are you talking in the legislature about the impact of the tariffs? Are you thinking about how to mitigate or enhance certain elements of tariffs? I would guess it's been difficult because it's sort of gone back and forth, and this level, but sort of legislatively, where are you with what's going on?
I think there have been a number of conversations around that, and when you look at the tariffs, I think what we're seeing too is how is that going to impact the budget? You know, when we're talking about, you know, revenue sources for the state of Michigan, how are tariffs, when you look at, you know, how the state of Michigan does with trade, whether it's with our neighbors in Canada or other countries across the globe. So there have been conversations just around that, and I think really how is it going to impact the state budget, and then also, you know, when we look at job growth as well too. So I don't think there has been anything that we've all settled on and agreed on specifically in terms of what will be the next steps. But there certainly have been a lot of conversations directly and also indirectly, whether it's officially in committee hearings or throughout the budget appropriations process.
Okay.
And I would agree with Representative Tate on the importance of what we need to be discussing and what we need to look at. Right now, we still don't really know. I mean, one day you hear a tariff is here, the next day there's the negotiations and there's some changes. You have GM, which has really started to reinvest in the United States to bring more manufacturing back. All those pieces really become very important, but we have to really see where this whole thing washes out and what those tariffs will do. For us to spend a lot of time legislatively right now when it's an unknown, we can do more harm than we could do good. And I think it's extremely important that we're all paying attention, we're all working. I've had many conversations with the folks from GM and from Ford, and you know, so we can be somewhat prepared. And they really don't know yet on what it's going to do to affect them. But ultimately, the number one goal is to make sure we keep the auto industry strong in the state of Michigan, the employees working, so that we can grow, and that economically will continue to make Michigan one of the best.
So let me ask you, what's it going to take to do that in your mind?
Well, in my mind, number one is we've got to work really hard as a legislative body to make sure that we put the tools in place. So we got to watch what we're going to put in lines of the business tax. We've got to make sure that we work on our taxes that incentivizes companies to make sure that they invest in the state of Michigan, because when they invest, that means more employees are here that invest in our economy, helps our small businesses, our restaurants, our schools, our education system. All those play a hand. So that ultimately comes down to is we've got to make sure they're strong, because they're one of our largest employers. If you take all the pieces and parts of the auto industry here in the state of Michigan, and sometimes we forget that. And when we do forget it, and Representative Tate and I have been around when we have forgotten, and when Michigan runs off, and we're always the first one to tell if the economy's softening, and we're one of the last to come back out. So we got to be ahead of the game.
Agreed, and I think, you know, as you mentioned with the tariffs, finding certainty around that, like what is that going to look like? Because I know companies have to be able to plan, they have to be able to allocate capital. I think from the state's perspective, we've been able to do a lot of things to support, I think, the business climate and setting up private industry for success. You know, we passed a R&D tax credit that was done on a bipartisan fashion. We also passed an innovation fund to spur like entrepreneurship, so those that have good ideas here in the state of Michigan can receive support from the state so they can grow and hopefully stay here in the state of Michigan as well too. Also funding for Going Pro, which is an apprenticeship program. I think we're up close to $50 million right now into that program. So being able to continue to allow our private industry to be able to use that to train and to grow, you know, their talent that they do have. I think it's, as Representative VanderWall mentioned as well too, how are we also talking about, population growth as well too, and making sure that, we support that and we don't get in its way, because we still do need to figure out in terms of population-wise, how are we moving this state forward?
I was just talking a few minutes ago with Senator McMurrow and Senator DeMoose about economic development. You look at rankings, Utah, Washington are sort of up there at the top, generally not auto related. What sorts of things do you see that Michigan should be doing right now to ensure that we stay competitive, remain competitive? You talked about competition, so that folks don't go to Tennessee or Ohio or other places as they are looking forward to the next generation of vehicle.
You want me to jump in first? Okay. And that's a great question. How does Michigan remain competitive? And I think very personally, as a small business owner, is that we need to make sure that we continue to give that small business the same tools as a large one. And we need to make sure that we're competitive on our tax rate. We need to make sure that what our employees are paying in lines of taxes, that we're working and we're very fair on that, so that those folks can remain there. I believe that if you look at this last contract that the big three signed, it's one of the strongest contracts that we've seen in the industry. So those people are looking towards the future. They're investing into the community. They're investing into the entire state, because if you look at where we touch in the auto industry and being part of the Auto Caucus, we're seeing contributors to the auto industry throughout the entire state. And we need to make sure that we allow them to grow. And I think right now we need to make sure that our tax rates and what we're charging businesses is very competitive, because it's very easy in today's world to be lured across state lines, and we can't allow that to happen.
And then also, just adding on to that, I think when we also look at, talent as well too, talent is able to migrate, I think, a little bit more freely, just in terms of how the economy is evolving. So you're seeing, I think, a lot of businesses, a lot of firms, and the state as well, thinking about where do people want to live. And I think that's where people are really starting to, see what that means. So also having those areas too where there's attainable housing, workforce housing that's available, that you have, the third place, as it's called, where do you go when you're not at work or you're not at home? So we've done a little bit of that with the revitalization and placemaking grants as well too. So I think the future is, as much as possible, how are we attracting talent, to the state, and what are those tools that we're using outside of, traditional economic development, classical economic development, which is incredibly important, like having a positive business climate, as well as, understanding what, our firms in the state of Michigan need, and attracting other firms as well too.
We've got about 2 minutes left, so this is probably the last question, but you were talking about talent, and in some of the other discussions I've had today, education is an important part of that, because our generations aren't going to be making flying cars. However, our kids' generations will be making flying cars. What do we need to do to set them up to be able to do that, so that we have the talent here in Michigan to build those flying cars in, 20, 30, 40 years?
It's the Jetsons, isn't
know,
it? We're coming all the way around to the Jetsons.
I was going to say, how much time do we have? No, I think, That's going to be the million, billion, trillion-dollar question. Is like, how are we increasing educational outcomes for our kids? I think there are going to be numerous, I think, places that we need to go, whether it's classroom size, which has been talked about, funding, which has been talked about, how long students are spending in classrooms, physical activity is another one, another place, aftercare. I mean, these are all pieces that have to be pointed the same direction. But what I will say is, I think at the end of the day, we just need a plan. I think we all, as legislators, need to come together, agree on a 10-year plan on what we need to do to improve educational outcomes.
And I think I'll finish off real quick. And the representative, I have worked really hard when it comes to the education piece, the career trades, and we've worked really hard inside our K through 12 program to make sure that kids get an opportunity to experience what the trades are about. But I think the other piece of what we've seen so much that we've done with what we've tried to do in education is we have so many groups that are out there right now that, they're building the battle bots type thing, but they're building code. And that's technically where all these automobiles are going to be, is all how we write code. It's not I don't really know how code works. Maybe he does, but that's way above who I am. And we need to invest in our children to give them the opportunity in school to fall in love with it. And I think we've neglected that in years past, and now we're really seeing that we got to give them those tools. So if we invest in the education, give them the opportunity, we'll soar to the future.
All right, thank you, Representative Curt VanderWall, Representative Joe Tate. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
So Jerome and representatives, I don't mean to stand in front of you, but this is where the director told me to stand to close this thing out. Thank you everyone for joining us for Live from Mackinac, sponsored by DTE Energy. Thank you, Jerome, and our other moderators, Rick Pluta and Samantha Schreiber. Thank you both for being here, and your colleagues. This has been great conversation. We look forward to doing it again tomorrow at 9:15. So if you're streaming this program, don't forget DetroitChamber.com. We'll be back at 9:15 with more great conversation. So thank you everyone, and have a good evening.
Thank you.